So this is Santarem, Portugal. Of the holy places we visit, this is probably the least familiar to you. And it's kind of an interesting thing how this all came about, because it wasn't on our original itinerary to even visit this. In fact, I have a copy of our little booklet that we all received, and if you go back here to the day we actually visited, it's not on here, even at the end. But we did get to go there. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that all came about. So, as you all know, early this year, our parish instituted the idea of disciple groups. And our Saturday ensemble decided that we would create a disciple group for us. And so during one of our meetings we had one evening, one of our members, Steve, mentioned that he was reading about miracles of the Eucharist. And he was talking about some of the things that he was reading, and particularly about this one young boy who actually passed away at age 15 a few years ago, who as a young boy was very interested in the Eucharist. And he started investigating all these miracles associated with the Eucharist. And one of the ones that Steve mentioned at our meeting was this one that took place at Santarem, Portugal. So this is a picture of a poster from their relics tour. And this is the one that happened to discuss this miracle that took place back at Santarem. So, like I said, this is probably the least familiar, so to kind of tell you a little bit about what took place in this miracle. So there was a lady who lived back in the 13th century, and she had an unhappy life. She was not happy with her husband. He didn't treat her very well. She felt that he was unfaithful to her, and she was wanting to improve her relationship with her husband, and things weren't going the way she wanted. So she decided to go see the sorceress to see if the sorceress could help her, improve her relationship with her husband. So the sorceress said yes, she could, but she had to bring her a consecrated host. So, she was a fairly religious lady. She wasn't real sure about, doing such a sacrilegious thing, but at the same time she wanted to improve her relationship with her husband. So she did. So one day she went to Mass, went to communion, but instead of consuming the host, she put it in her kerchief and then left the church. And she was going to the sorceress's house with this host. Well, along the way, some people noticed that she was bleeding, but she didn't realize she was bleeding. And then when they stopped to see if they could help her, she realized that the blood was coming from this host she had in her kerchief. So then she went home instead and put this in a chest that she had in her bedroom. And then later, her husband came home. She didn't say anything about what she did to him. They went to bed, and then during the night, they woke with this light that filled their bedroom. And they realized it was coming from this chest where that host was. At that point, she confessed to her husband what she had done, and this was this host there. So at that point, they got down on their knees and started praying and in adoration to this. So then the next morning they went and talked to the priest at the church. He came and brought the host back to the church. And so there's a second part of this, that he encased this with some beeswax and then put it in a monstrous in a tabernacle. Later, and I'm not sure, the dates aren't real good here, but sometime later that he opened up this tabernacle, and that beeswax had been crumbled and replaced by crystalline pyx. And that's where this host had, and the blood had remained. So at that point, I'm going to pass this over to my wife, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our visit to this church.
Want to go next one? Okay, so this is a picture of the actual shrine. Now, Santarem itself is a really old city. There's information that says that the Romans actually were in this city in 2 BC. And it's built up on a ridge. And you didn't notice that when we drove up to Santarem, but on our way back down the bus trip, you could see a long way. So that's why it had probably some sort of significance into the political, army situation that this town was created. So when we got out of the bus, obviously the bus couldn't take these cobblestone streets because they were very narrow because all the houses are very close together. So we walked up a very nondescript street, just a bunch of older houses that dated from the 1200s, and the cobblestone street we walked up, and then we came across the shrine, the church. It was very difficult to get a picture of it because you couldn't stand far enough away to get a picture of the full view of the church. And so this is the shrine. You notice on the right-hand side there's a red banner that has some Latin words, and basically it says that the miracle happened in 1247, and this is the church where the pastor came from that went and collected the host and took it to this church. And that's why it also has the blue significant on the side where it's built in, that's reliquary. That is the significance of that is where that was the beeswax, where it held that host during that time. So, go ahead. And so this is the outside. So this, we were not allowed to take pictures inside. There were 2 caretakers that were taking care of this church. And normally it's not open on Tuesdays, and we had arrived on Tuesday, so part of the agreement was that they would have a caretaker come in and open it up for us. And so we weren't allowed to take pictures, but I found this beautiful picture of the inside of the church. And personally, I felt very privileged that we were able to come in and see the church. Now, the host and the blood is held in a monstrance, and we had a picture of it before, but I have a better one in just a moment. But that is what's up here that's lit up, and that's where that actual host with the blood and that crystal pyx is located. You can see it's really high up above the altar. So when we came in and of course we're amazed by the beautiful church. We sat down on pews, but what you cannot see is that there are paintings along the top of the church that depict the story that my husband just mentioned about the husband and the wife and the host. They are listed on the around the side. That they had redone this church. There was an earthquake that happened back in the 1500s, and they had to do some revising and rebuilding of the church. And if you notice that there is Latin that they had inscribed above the arch, and it says, "Truly the Lord is in that place," that they put that up there after they rebuilt that. So after we all came into the church, we all, took our seats there in the pews. And from where I sat there, excuse me, there is a doorway over to the left of the sanctuary. So we were sitting there, and all of a sudden a caretaker came out and kind of went into that, off the sanctuary, and I didn't really realize where he had gone. And you can't see it, but there's a series of steps that go around and come out, and there's a room up here behind there. And in that room is like a museum, a small museum, where there was a lot of artifacts that evidently were presented to as a result of this miracle. So there was a lot of royalty back at, this happened in the 1200s. So there's been 700 some years have passed, and there were a lot of royalty that came and were involved with this. So there's a lot of artifacts that have been presented, and excuse me, that was what was up in that room. So we took turns. So the caretaker, well, before we got there, the caretaker, I noticed that up there, you can see the door to that is open. Well, when we arrived, the door was closed. And I knew from sitting there that that's where the monstrance was going to be located. So I saw that the caretaker had gone upstairs, or gone around there, disappeared, and I could see the door became ajar. And at that time, I had no expectation that we would be able to go up there, because I thought where we were sitting in the pew was going to be it. So, we were all getting excited to know that the caretaker was going to allow us to go up individually, up around the stairs. And when you got up there, you kind of looked at the artifacts, and then you realized that there was a ladder, maybe about this tall, very steep, tiny rungs, that if you look, they had pulled the drape aside. And so you were allowed to go up there, and it came out right behind where the monstrance was. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is what we could see, and we were like this close to it when we were viewing it, very close. So to me, I think the best part of this trip was the spirituality of being there next to this. And so you can see there's an outline in there a little bit of the host and the blood there as well. So we each got a chance to be there in that moment. And then afterwards, we came back down around, and I think what the joy for me was just seeing everybody's reaction, as they came down, one by one in our groups. So.
Okay, so we all came back down, so we all were sitting in the pews, and we were sitting there for a moment, and Elizabeth, who was our tour guide for this day, asked, "Do you want to sing? We're here, you can sing." Well, this was our last stop of the holy places. We just came from Fatima, so we had our music, but it was back in the bus. And so we're thinking, we're not going to walk all the way back to the bus to get something. What song can we sing without our music? So I was thinking to myself, well, we could do the Easter chant. It's got simple, repetitive lyrics. And other people were thinking the same thing. So James gathered us up in front of the church, and we did the Easter chant. Now you can ask James what his thoughts were, but I thought this was one of our better, if not our best, performances of that song. So we didn't have our music, so we could focus on James, and as he was directing us for our dynamics and our note downs and our cutoffs, and we just sang from the heart. And for me personally, I think this was that performance was one of the highlights of our trip. It was impromptu, wasn't on schedule. We just did it.
And I think to add to that, when I turned around after we got finished singing, the caretakers were standing there, and you could see that we had brought joy to them. Because I think it was totally unexpected for them to know that we were going to sing, and of course it was unexpected for us because we didn't expect to be standing up there singing either. So I think for me personally, the highlight of the trip was this. Because it was very emotional, and I think it was very intimate. It was intimate in the fact that you were right there, less than a foot from that monstrance. So, we have one more slide, I think. This is in the house where the husband and wife lived. They created a chapel there in about the 1600s. Because I think it's the second Sunday of every April, they have the procession that goes back and relives the procession and when they took the original host back to the church. So they get the monsters from the church, and then they walk down the street, because I think the address is on the same street. And they went back to that, and they recreate the procession going back the other way. So. Okay.
Hermanos.